When I think back to our early days together, I always remember the sense of calm that defined our relationship. We met at a time when my life needed some stability, and she brought exactly that. There was something special about her, a genuine light in her eyes whenever she spoke about her ranch. Her love for animals was evident in every move she made, every gesture. She didn't just take care of them, she truly loved them. On our first date, she talked so passionately about the newborn calves that I realized this woman saw something in the world that most of us simply missed. I was captivated by her passion. In fact, I've always admired people who are completely dedicated to what they do, and she was one of them. We spent evenings at her ranch, and I watched her care for every animal, from the smallest chickens to the powerful bulls. She knew their names, their quirks, their habits. Strangely enough, her love for those animals brought us closer. We learned to trust each other in the same way the animals trusted her. She was always there when I needed her. I felt like I could share all my thoughts and fears with her. With her care and devotion, I started to feel like maybe I'd found the one person I wanted to spend my life with. She wasn't just my wife. She was a true friend. We supported each other, found common ground in difficult situations, and knew how to laugh at the little things. Our relationship felt strong and dependable, like the old oak tree on her property. However, I couldn't help but notice that her love for the ranch sometimes seemed excessive. There were times when I caught myself thinking that the animals meant more to her than the people around her. There were moments when I felt like she would rather stay at the ranch than join me for a night out with friends. I wasn't angry. I understood her. But at times, I felt like I was just an extra part of her life. Her work on the ranch often took up all her free time. Sometimes it felt like our relationship was second to her love for those cows and horses. I knew she loved me, but her attention was always somewhere else. We spent less time together, and I began to feel like our bond was slowly weakening. Maybe it was my own fear of losing her, or maybe it was her overwhelming love for her work, but those feelings started to grow stronger. Still, I always respected her dedication. She was in her element on that ranch. Seeing her standing in the green fields, surrounded by animals that adored her, was a true pleasure. She always knew what she was doing. I never doubted her ability to handle any challenge, whether it was bad weather or a difficult bull. She was a strong woman, and that quality always attracted me. Sometimes, I tried to find ways to make her life on the ranch a little easier. I helped her fix fences, feed the animals, even learned how to drive a tractor just to be useful. But I understood that despite all my efforts, I could never fully share her passion. She was so immersed in that world that I often felt like a bystander. Looking back, I realized that it was her passion for that place and those creatures that made her the person I fell in love with. Maybe I could never truly understand her attachment, but I always admired that she had something to which she gave her heart and soul. Yes, I wish she would spend more time with us sometimes. But I knew her work wasn't just a duty. It was a part of who she was, and by loving her, I accepted that part too. It started with small things I didn't pay much attention to at first. She began coming home later than usual, her boots covered in more mud than I'd ever seen before. Her excuses were always simple. Something about extra work that needed to be done, an animal that required special care. At first, I didn't question it. After all, I knew how dedicated she was to the ranch. If there was anyone who could be trusted to put in extra effort for the animals, it was her. And I thought it was just her commitment shining through, as always. But then, I noticed that distant look in her eyes. It was like she was there with me physically, but her mind was miles away, back at the ranch. She'd stare off into the distance while we were having dinner. Her fork paused midair as if she had forgotten where she was. I would ask her if something was bothering her, but she would just smile and say she was tired, that the work had been exhausting. I tried to believe her, tried to tell myself it was nothing more than fatigue. After all, managing a ranch wasn't easy, and I knew she took her responsibilities seriously. It wasn't just the late returns and the distant looks. It was also the way she talked about that new bull. She spoke about him endlessly, as if he were the most fascinating creature she'd ever encountered. There was a spark in her eyes when she mentioned him, a sort of excitement that I hadn't seen in a while. She described his strength, his temperament, and how magnificent he was. I tried to share her enthusiasm, but there was something about the way she spoke that made me uneasy. It wasn't like her usual stories about the animals. It felt different, more intense somehow. At first, I shrugged it off. I told myself it was just her passion for her work, that she had simply found something new and exciting to focus on. The ranch was her life, and it wasn't unusual for her to get deeply involved with the animals. I convinced myself that there was nothing strange about it. She had always loved her work, and perhaps this new bull was just another challenge for her, something that brought a spark back into her daily routine. I wanted to be supportive, to be the understanding husband who didn't make a fuss over nothing. But as the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She seemed more distant, more detached from our life together. She would come home late, barely say a word, and then head straight to bed. Even when we did have time together, her mind seemed elsewhere. I would ask her how her day went, and she would respond with vague answers, always steering the conversation back to the bull. It was as if nothing else mattered anymore. It was unsettling, and I found myself lying awake at night, wondering what was happening to us. One evening, she came home later than ever, her clothes disheveled, her hair a mess. She looked exhausted but had that same distant, almost dreamy look in her eyes. I asked her if everything was okay, and she just nodded, giving me a weak smile. She said that the bull had been restless and that she had to stay late to calm him down. There was something in her voice that made me feel uneasy, a kind of fondness that I couldn't quite place. I wanted to ask more, to press her for details, but I didn't. I didn't want to seem paranoid or accusatory. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was losing touch with her. She was slipping away, and there was nothing I could do about it. I tried to be more present, tried to make our time together meaningful, but it felt like I was competing with something I couldn't understand. She was there, but at the same time, she wasn't. It felt like the ranch, and that bull in particular, had taken over her life. I couldn't help but feel like an outsider, watching her drift further and further away from me. I kept telling myself that it was just a phase, that things would go back to normal eventually. But deep down, I knew that something fundamental had shifted. The woman who once shared everything with me now seemed like a stranger. Her laughter, her warmth, they were still there, but only in fleeting moments. Most of the time, it felt like she was a million miles away, lost in a world that I couldn't reach. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was slowly losing her to something beyond my control. As time went on, that uneasy feeling inside me only grew stronger. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong. She was spending more and more time at the ranch, coming home late almost every night. It wasn't just the hours she kept. It was the look on her face when she finally walked through the door. There was something distant in her eyes, a kind of detachment that made me feel like I wasn't really there with her. She would smile at me, but it was a hollow smile, lacking the warmth that used to be there. It was as if her mind was still out there, somewhere on the ranch, even when she was standing right in front of me. I tried talking to her about it. I tried asking if everything was okay, if she was overwhelmed or stressed out. But every time, she would brush it off with the same answers. "It's just work," she'd say, or "the animals need me more these days." She always found a way to redirect the conversation, to reassure me without really giving me any answers. The more I tried to understand, the less I seemed to know. It felt like there was this invisible wall between us, one that I couldn't break through no matter how hard I tried. She was always tired, always preoccupied. The woman who used to laugh with me, share stories from her day, and plan our weekends together now seemed like she had no energy left for any of it. I'd watch her slump onto the couch, her eyes barely meeting mine, and I'd wonder where she went. There was a time when she would come home excited to tell me about her day, about a calf being born or about fixing a broken fence. Now, she barely spoke, and when she did, it was almost always about the ranch and that new bull. I wanted to believe that it was just a rough patch, that the workload had increased and it would pass. But it was getting harder to convince myself of that. The way she spoke about the bull, the way her eyes seemed to light up when she mentioned him, it made me uncomfortable. She wasn't like this with any of the other animals. There was a kind of fascination in her voice that I couldn't quite place. I tried not to let it bother me, but it was eating away at me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts whenever I was alone. Even when we were together, it felt like I was losing her. We would sit down for dinner, and she'd barely touch her food. I'd try to start a conversation, ask her about her day, but her answers were always short and vague. It was as if she didn't want to talk to me, or maybe she couldn't. I wasn't sure which was worse. I could feel the distance between us growing, and no matter how much I tried to bridge that gap, it felt like she was slipping further away. I missed her, and I didn't know how to get her back. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had changed. I replayed our conversations over and over in my mind, searching for clues, for something I might have missed. Was it something I did? Was it something I didn't do? The doubt was like a weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I wanted to believe that we were still the same couple, that we could still talk about anything, but it was becoming clear that there were things she wasn't telling me. The worst part was the helplessness. I could see her drifting away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I tried to be supportive, to give her space when she needed it, but the more I gave, the more distant she became. It felt like I was losing her to something I couldn't compete with. I missed her laughter, her warmth, the way she used to look at me. Now, there was only that distant gaze, and the feeling that I was no longer a part of her world. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. I didn't want to push her away by being too demanding, but I also couldn't just stand by and watch her slip away. I needed answers, but every attempt I made to get them only seemed to push her further into herself. It was like she was guarding a secret, something she couldn't share with me. And that thought, more than anything, filled me with a deep, growing sense of dread. After weeks of trying to make sense of everything, I decided that I needed another perspective. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, and it was starting to eat me alive. I knew I couldn't keep going around in circles inside my own head. So, I picked up the phone and called her friend, Anna. Anna worked on the ranch with her, and I thought if anyone could give me some insight, it would be her. I tried to keep my tone casual when I asked her about how things were going at the ranch, hoping she wouldn't sense the worry that had been keeping me up at night. Anna was friendly as always, but there was something in her voice that felt guarded. She spoke about the usual ranch duties, the long days, the repairs they were working on. When I finally mentioned how my wife had been staying late almost every night, Anna paused for a moment before answering. She said that the extra hours weren't really necessary, that most of the work could have been done during the day. That made my heart sink a little. I had assumed that all those late nights were because of the workload, because she was needed there. But according to Anna, that wasn't the case at all. I pressed Anna a little more, trying to get to the bottom of it without sounding too desperate. I asked if there had been any emergencies lately, anything that would explain why my wife was spending so much time there. Anna hesitated before answering, and I could feel my stomach twist in knots as I waited for her response. She finally said that it wasn't about the work. My wife was staying at the ranch by her own choice. Anna's words hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't the ranch that needed her. It was something else, something she wasn't telling me. The more Anna spoke, the more uneasy I felt. She mentioned how my wife seemed to be spending a lot of time with the new bull, even when there was no real reason to. She described how my wife would linger by his pen, watching him, almost as if she was fascinated by him. Anna tried to laugh it off, saying that maybe my wife had just found the bull interesting, but there was something in her tone that told me she wasn't entirely convinced by her own words. I could tell that Anna was holding something back, that she didn't want to say too much. By the time I hung up the phone, my mind was racing. I had called Anna hoping to find some reassurance, something that would explain everything and put my mind at ease. But instead, I was left with more questions than answers. Why was she staying late if it wasn't for the work? Why was she spending so much time with that bull? I tried to tell myself that it was nothing, that maybe she just enjoyed being at the ranch, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. There was something she wasn't telling me, something that I was missing. That conversation with Anna changed everything. It was the first time I truly felt like I couldn't trust what my wife was telling me. Up until then, I had tried to believe her, to take her at her word when she said she was just tired or that the animals needed her. But now, I wasn't so sure. The way Anna had spoken, the hesitation in her voice, It all pointed to something more. I could feel the doubt creeping in, taking hold of me in a way that I couldn't shake. I wanted to believe that there was a simple explanation, but the more I thought about it, the less likely that seemed. I spent the next few days trying to act normal, trying not to let on that I was suspicious. I didn't want her to know that I had called Anna, that I was starting to question everything she had been telling me. But it was hard. Every time she came home late, every time she spoke about the ranch, I found myself wondering if she was being honest. I watched her more closely, looking for any sign that she might be hiding something. It was exhausting, living with that constant sense of doubt, but I couldn't help it. I needed to know what was going on. The worst part was that I didn't know what to do next. I couldn't confront her without revealing that I had talked to Anna, and I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to have that conversation, to hear what she might say. Part of me was afraid of what I would find out, afraid that my worst fears might be true. So, I kept quiet, hoping that somehow, things would go back to the way they were. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Things had changed, and there was no going back. One night, after weeks of sleeplessness and constant doubt, I found myself sitting up in bed, staring at the ceiling. I could hear her soft breathing next to me, steady and calm, while my thoughts raced. I couldn't take it anymore. The not knowing, the endless questions that had no answers. I needed to find something, anything, that would make sense of what was happening. So, I quietly got out of bed, careful not to wake her, and made my way to where she kept her phone. I knew it was wrong. I knew that going through her things was a betrayal of the trust we had built over the years. But I was desperate. I needed answers, and I couldn't think of any other way to get them. My hands were shaking as I picked up her phone, my heart pounding in my chest. I unlocked it and started scrolling through her messages, her call logs, looking for anything that might explain why she had been so distant, why she was spending so much time at the ranch. But there was nothing. Message after message, everything looked normal. There were conversations with friends, with her family, with people from the ranch. But nothing stood out, nothing seemed out of place. I checked her call history, but there were no unusual numbers, no late-night calls that she hadn't mentioned. I even went through her photos, hoping to find something that might give me a clue. But all I found were pictures of the animals, the ranch, the usual things she always took photos of. It was like there was nothing to find, and that only made me feel worse. I put her phone down, my heart still racing. I felt a mix of emotions. Relief that there was nothing suspicious, but also a deep sense of frustration. If there was nothing on her phone, then what was going on? Why was she acting this way? I couldn't make sense of it. It felt like I was missing a piece of the puzzle, something that would explain everything. I wanted to believe that maybe I was wrong, that maybe there was nothing to worry about. But the way she had been acting, the things Anna had said, they didn't add up. I moved on to her laptop, hoping that maybe there would be something there. I knew it was a long shot, but I had to try. I opened it up, went through her emails, her social media, anything that might give me some answers. But again, there was nothing. Everything was normal, mundane even. It was like she had nothing to hide. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling me. The more I searched, the more hopeless I felt. It was as if I was looking for something that didn't exist, chasing shadows in the dark. After what felt like hours, I finally gave up. I closed her laptop, put everything back where it belonged, and sat down at the kitchen table, my head in my hands. I felt defeated, like I had reached a dead end. There were no answers, no clues, nothing that could explain why she had been acting so strangely. And that sense of helplessness was almost worse than finding something incriminating. At least if I had found something, I would know what I was dealing with. But this uncertainty, this not knowing, it was tearing me apart. I sat there in the dark, the silence of the house pressing down on me. I felt a deep sense of loneliness, like I was completely cut off from her, from the woman I loved. She was right there, asleep in the next room, and yet she felt a million miles away. I didn't know what to do, how to bridge the gap that had grown between us. I wanted to wake her up, to ask her what was going on, to demand answers. But I knew I couldn't. Not like this. Not without something concrete to go on. Eventually, I made my way back to bed, slipping under the covers as quietly as I could. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing. I wanted to reach out, to hold her, to feel that connection again. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. The doubts, the questions, they were still there, and they kept me frozen in place. I knew I had to find another way, something that would give me the answers I needed. But for now, all I could do was lie there, feeling more alone than I ever had before. The feeling of helplessness gnawed at me every single day, and I knew that I couldn't keep going on like this. I had tried talking to her. I had tried searching for answers on my own, but I was still left in the dark. That gnawing sense of unease wasn't going away. If anything, it was getting worse. One day, after another late night where she came home looking more distant than ever, I realized that I needed to take things a step further. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. It was something I agonized over, but I knew I needed the truth, whatever it might be. I decided to call Anna again. This time, the conversation would be different. This time, I needed her to help me in a way that went far beyond what I ever thought I would ask of someone. I remember sitting in my car, gripping my phone tightly, trying to find the courage to actually make the call. My hands were trembling, and my heart was pounding as I thought about what I was about to do. I felt a mix of shame and desperation. This wasn't who I was. I wasn't the kind of man who went behind his wife's back, who tried to dig up secrets in the shadows. But I had reached a point where I felt like I had no other choice. I needed to know what was happening, and Anna was my only link to the ranch, the only person who could tell me what was really going on. I dialed her number, and when she picked up, I tried to keep my voice steady, though I knew she could hear the tension. Anna was understandably hesitant at first. When I told her what I wanted, when I offered her money to secretly record what my wife was doing at the ranch, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could feel her discomfort, her reluctance, and it only made me feel worse about what I was asking. But I pushed on, explaining that I just needed to know, that I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. I told her that I trusted her, that I had no one else to turn to. There was a part of me that felt like I was crossing a line that once crossed, there would be no going back. But I was past the point of caring. I needed answers, and if this was the only way to get them, then so be it. Eventually, Anna agreed. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, as she told me that she would do it. I could hear the unease in her tone, the way she hesitated with every word. She wasn't comfortable with it, and I didn't blame her. I wasn't comfortable either, but I thanked her, told her how much it meant to me, and hung up the phone. For a long time, I just sat there in the car, staring at the dashboard, feeling the weight of what I had done settle in. I had crossed a line, and now all I could do was wait. Wait for whatever truth Anna would uncover. Wait to finally understand what was happening in my own marriage. The waiting was unbearable. Every day felt like an eternity as I went through the motions of my life, pretending that everything was normal. I would watch her leave for the ranch, wondering what she would be doing, wondering what Anna might find. My mind was filled with scenarios, each one worse than the last. I tried to prepare myself for whatever truth might come, but it was impossible. The uncertainty gnawed at me, kept me awake at night, made it hard to focus on anything else. I knew that whatever Anna discovered, it would change everything. But I needed to know. I needed the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I could feel the tension building between us at home. She could sense that something was off, that I was different. I tried to act normal, tried to pretend that everything was fine, but it was exhausting. I was constantly on edge, waiting for my phone to buzz, waiting for that message from Anna that would finally tell me what was really going on. Every time my phone rang, my heart would leap into my throat, and I would feel a mix of dread and anticipation. I had put everything on the line for this. My marriage, my trust in her, my own sense of who I was. All of it hung in the balance, waiting for the truth to come to light. The day I received the message from Anna, my stomach twisted in knots. I had been waiting for this moment for what felt like forever. Yet now that it was here, I almost didn't want to open it. I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to throw the phone away, to pretend that everything was fine and that I didn't need to know the truth. But I had come too far for that. I had crossed too many lines to back out now. So, I took a deep breath, clicked on the video file, and braced myself for whatever I was about to see. The video started off innocently enough, at least for the first few seconds. It was the ranch, the familiar sight of the fields and the animals. I could see her, my wife, walking towards the pen where the bull was kept. She looked calm, relaxed, as if she belonged there. But as the video went on, my heart began to sink. She wasn't dressed. She was completely naked, her clothes nowhere in sight. My mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. I couldn't believe it. My wife, standing there, completely vulnerable, in front of that bull. She moved closer to the bull, her hands running over its body, stroking it gently. It was like she was in a trance, her eyes fixed on the animal, her movements slow and deliberate. I felt my stomach churn, a mix of confusion and disgust washing over me. What the hell was she doing? It didn't make any sense. There was something almost ritualistic about the way she moved, the way she touched the bull. My mind raced, trying to find an explanation, anything that could make this make sense. But there was nothing. No reason, no justification. It was just wrong. And then it got worse. She pressed herself against the bull, her body moving against it in a way that made my skin crawl. I felt my face flush with a mix of anger, shame, and something else I couldn't quite name. I wanted to look away, to stop watching, but I couldn't. It was like I was frozen, my eyes glued to the screen, unable to tear myself away from the nightmare that was unfolding before me. My heart pounded in my ears, my hands trembling as I held the phone. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This was my wife, the woman I loved, the person I thought I knew better than anyone else in the world. And yet, here she was, doing something I couldn't even begin to understand. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. She knelt down, her hands moving towards the bull's intimate area. My breath caught in my throat as I watched her do the unthinkable. I felt a wave of nausea rise up inside me, my entire body tensing in horror. What she was doing was beyond anything I could have imagined. It was obscene, grotesque, something that defied all logic, all decency. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, to make it all go away. But I couldn't. I just sat there, watching, my mind numb, my heart shattered. I don't know how long the video lasted, but it felt like an eternity. By the time it ended, I was left staring at the screen, my hands shaking, my mind blank. I couldn't think, couldn't process what I had just seen. It was like my entire world had come crashing down around me, and I was left standing in the ruins, unsure of what to do next. The woman in that video wasn't the woman I knew. She wasn't the person I had married, the person I had built my life with. She was a stranger, someone I couldn't even begin to understand. A part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to wake her up and demand answers. But another part of me was too stunned, too broken to do anything. I felt a deep sense of betrayal, a pain that cut deeper than anything I had ever felt before. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was something far worse, something that went beyond anything I could have imagined. I felt lost, adrift in a sea of emotions that I couldn't begin to untangle. I sat there for what felt like hours, the weight of what I had just seen pressing down on me, crushing me. I didn't know what to do, how to move forward. All I knew was that everything had changed. There was no going back from this. The truth was out, and now I had to figure out what to do with it. But in that moment, all I could do was sit there, staring at the screen, my mind reeling, my heart broken into a million pieces. The rage hit me like a tidal wave, sweeping away any sense of restraint I might have had left. I couldn't contain it anymore. The hurt, the betrayal, the disgust. It all erupted inside me, demanding to be acted upon. Without thinking twice, I got up and marched to our bedroom, grabbing her clothes from the closet, pulling out her shoes, her bags, everything that was hers. My hands moved almost on their own, fueled by the anger that burned inside of me. One by one, I tossed her things into a pile, every piece of clothing, every personal item landing with a finality that seemed to echo in the silence of the house. Once I had everything gathered, I dragged it all out to the front yard. It was late at night, the air cold and biting, but I didn't care. I wanted her to see it. I wanted her to understand that her place in this house was no longer guaranteed, that her actions had consequences, and this was one of them. I dropped her bags, her clothes, all of it in the yard, my breath coming out in harsh puffs as I stood there, staring at the mess I had made. It wasn't just her belongings lying there. It was the wreckage of everything we had built together. There was a strange sort of clarity that came with the rage, a cold resolve that replaced the confusion and the doubt that had plagued me for so long. I wasn't going to let her walk back into this house as if nothing had happened. I wasn't going to pretend that what I had seen could ever be forgiven. She had made her choices, and now I was making mine. I wanted her out of my life, out of my home. The pain was still there, a deep, aching wound that I knew would take a long time to heal, but I also felt a sense of determination, a resolve to move forward without her. I went back inside, my hands still trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. I sat down in the living room, staring at the door, waiting. I knew she would be home soon, and I was ready for her. I played the scene over and over in my mind, imagining how she would react, what she would say. I imagined the shock, the confusion, the excuses she might try to make. But none of it mattered. I had made up my mind. There was no going back from this. I was done with the lies, done with the deceit. I deserved better than this, better than what she had done to me. It felt like an eternity before I heard the sound of her car pulling up outside. My body tensed, every muscle tight as I waited. I heard the car door slam, her footsteps crunching on the gravel as she approached the house. There was a pause, and I knew she had seen the pile of her belongings in the yard. I could picture her standing there, staring at it, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. And then, the door opened, and she stepped inside, her face a mask of confusion and shock. She looked at me, her eyes wide, her mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came out. I stood up, meeting her gaze with a cold, unflinching stare. "What is this?" she finally managed to ask, her voice shaky, barely above a whisper. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, letting the silence stretch between us, letting her feel the weight of what was happening. I wanted her to understand that this wasn't just an argument, that this was the end. "You need to leave," I said, my voice low but firm. Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head, as if trying to deny the reality in front of her. She started to say something, her voice breaking, but I held up my hand, stopping her. "I know," I said, the words coming out harsher than I intended. "I know everything. There's nothing you can say that will change that." I could see the panic in her eyes, the way her face crumpled as the tears began to fall, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not anymore. She tried to step closer, reaching out as if to touch me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "It's over," I said, my voice steady, even as my heart felt like it was shattering all over again. "Take your things and leave." The words hung in the air, final and unforgiving. She stood there, frozen, her tears streaming down her face, and I could see the realization finally sinking in. This was it. There was no going back. And as much as it hurt, I knew that this was what I needed to do. For myself. For my own sanity. After that awful confrontation, I found myself sitting alone in the silence of the house. It felt empty, hollow, like the life that had once filled it had been sucked out completely. But there was one last thing I knew I needed to do. The video was still on my phone, and I couldn't keep it to myself. I needed to take action, to ensure that she couldn't continue hiding behind lies, that she faced the consequences of what she had done. The ranch had always been a part of her life, and as much as it hurt, I knew that the truth had to come out there too. I decided to send the video to the owner of the ranch. I remember sitting there, my finger hovering over the send button, a deep sense of dread settling in my stomach. Part of me felt guilty. This was going to ruin her. This was the place she had poured her heart and soul into, the one thing she had always cared about above everything else. But then, I remembered the betrayal, the lies, and the way she had destroyed everything we had. My anger resurfaced, and with a steady hand, I hit send. It was out of my hands now. The truth was going to catch up with her, and there was no way to avoid it. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. A few days later, I heard from one of my friends who had connections at the ranch. He called me, his voice low and filled with a mix of shock and disbelief. He told me that the owner had confronted her with the video, that there had been a massive argument. She had tried to deny it at first, but there was no denying what was clearly on the screen. It was humiliating, degrading, and everyone there knew about it. The ranch, the place that had once been her sanctuary, had turned into a scene of shame and disgrace. The owner had no choice but to fire her. There was no way they could keep her on after what she had done. It wasn't just about her actions. It was about the trust she had shattered, the image she had tarnished. The ranch was a business, a place that others depended on, and her behavior was something that simply couldn't be overlooked. My friend told me how she had been escorted off the property, her head down, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had begged, pleaded for another chance, but there was no coming back from what she had done. Hearing about it made my heart ache in a way I wasn't expecting. As much as I wanted her to face the consequences, as much as I felt like she deserved it, it was still painful to know that she had lost everything. The ranch was her passion, her purpose. It was the one thing she had always been truly devoted to, and now it was gone. She had nothing left. My friend told me that she looked broken, like a shell of the person she used to be. It was as if the very thing that had given her life meaning had been ripped away, leaving her empty. I started hearing more from others, friends, acquaintances, people who had heard about what happened. They talked about how she was struggling, how she was lost without the ranch. She had poured everything into that place, and now, without it, she didn't seem to know what to do with herself. She had lost her job, her community, her identity. It was as if the foundation of her life had crumbled beneath her, and she was left trying to pick up the pieces, not knowing where to begin. As much as I wanted to hate her, as much as I wanted to feel vindicated, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for what she had become. I knew that she had brought this on herself, that her actions had led her to this point. But it was still hard to hear about her suffering, to know that she was struggling to find a reason to keep going. She had lost the one thing that mattered most to her, and in some ways, I understood that feeling all too well. I had lost her, the woman I thought I knew, the life I thought we had together. We were both left in the aftermath of her choices, both trying to figure out how to move forward from the wreckage. In the end, I realized that there was nothing left for me to do. I had done what I needed to do. I had confronted her. I had exposed the truth, and now it was up to her to figure out how to live with the consequences. I couldn't save her, and I didn't want to. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. All I could do was focus on myself, on trying to rebuild my own life, even as I knew that the shadow of what had happened would always be there, lingering in the background, a reminder of everything we had lost. Years had passed since that dark chapter of my life had finally closed, and I had done everything in my power to move on. I had a new home now, a place that was truly mine, filled with the warmth and love that I had longed for during those final, miserable days of my marriage. I had met someone new, a woman who brought light back into my life, someone who made me believe in love again. She was kind, understanding, and most of all, she made me feel like I was finally free from the weight of my past. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a future worth looking forward to. The days that once seemed endless and filled with doubt and despair had transformed into something better. I spent my time with my new partner, building a life together that felt real and fulfilling. We talked about everything, shared our hopes, our dreams, and our fears. It was so different from the silence and distance that had grown between my ex-wife and me. There were no secrets, no hidden parts of our lives that tore us apart. It was honest and open, and that was exactly what I needed. One afternoon, as I was sitting on the porch, enjoying the quiet of the day, my phone rang. It was my old friend, the same one who had called me all those years ago to tell me about what had happened at the ranch. I answered, expecting it to be a casual conversation, maybe a chat about work or the latest news. But the tone in his voice told me that this wasn't just a friendly call. He hesitated for a moment, as if he wasn't sure how to say what he needed to say. And then he said it. "You're not going to believe this, but your ex-wife, she ended up in a psychiatric hospital." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. It felt like time had stopped, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. He went on to explain that after everything had happened, after she had lost her job at the ranch and her sense of purpose, she had moved to a different city. She had tried to start over, to find something that could give her life meaning again. She had taken a job at a zoo, hoping, perhaps, that working with animals might fill the void that had been left inside of her. But it hadn't worked. My friend told me that things had taken a dark turn. She had become increasingly unstable, her behavior more and more erratic. The people at the zoo had noticed something was off, but no one knew just how far she had spiraled. And then, one day, they found her in one of the enclosures, with a gorilla. She was naked, her body pressed against the animal, just like in that video from all those years ago. It was a scene that shocked everyone who saw it, and it was clear that she had lost touch with reality. They had no choice but to call the authorities, and she was taken away, admitted to a psychiatric hospital. I sat there, listening to my friend, feeling a strange mix of emotions. There was shock, of course, but also a deep sadness. I had thought that I had put her behind me, that the pain and the betrayal were things of the past. But hearing about her now, hearing about what had happened to her, it brought everything back. I remembered the woman I had fallen in love with, the person she had once been, and it was hard to reconcile that memory with the image my friend was painting. She had lost everything, not just her job, not just her sense of purpose, but her very mind. It was as if the darkness that had once consumed our marriage had finally taken over completely. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to think that she had gotten what she deserved after everything she had done. But I couldn't bring myself to feel that way. It was too tragic, too painful. No one deserved to end up like that. I knew she had made her choices, that she had brought so much of this on herself, but it was still hard to hear. I couldn't help but wonder if there had been something I could have done, some way I could have helped her before things had gotten so bad. But I knew that was just wishful thinking. The truth was, she had been lost long before I had realized it, and there was nothing I could have done to save her. After I hung up the phone, I sat there for a long time, staring out at the horizon. My partner came out to join me, sensing that something was wrong. She didn't ask questions, didn't press me for details. She just sat down beside me, took my hand in hers, and held it. And in that moment, I realized just how far I had come. The past was still there, a shadow that lingered, but it no longer defined me. I had a new life now, a new love, and that was what mattered. As painful as it was to hear about my ex-wife, I knew that I couldn't let it drag me back into the darkness. I had moved on, and I had to keep moving forward.